And we're live. Today is going to be a solo episode, just me. I'm not going to do this. I plan not to do this very often, and if I have another opportunity to have anyone on, um, I do prefer to because I do think that there's enormous value in in the emergence of conversation, in the back and forth, where even if you're talking to someone that you've spoken to 100 times before, um, actually, it's been you know this has been evident based on the previous podcasts, the previous, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 episodes have pretty much been with people that I've known and that I've spent many, many, many hours talking to, and cheers, talk to. Um, and even though we've spent so many hours talking about so many different things, there's something about, there's something about recording a podcast where you know that you're being recorded that helps you choose your words differently, I think, which actually creates a certain new type of conversation that you may not have had in a more unofficial or informal context. Um, and also, you kind of want to choose your words a little bit more carefully and be a little bit more conscious and cognizant of what it is that you're saying and how you're saying it. And I think that, conversation and the way that we think is very much subject to the circumstance that we find ourselves in. And this could be in a threatening environment, a non-threatening environment. This could be an official environment or a more laid back environment. This could be really applies to almost anything and everything. And so, there's different types of conversation that I'm going to have or different trains of thoughts that I'm going to have when I'm feeding off of somebody. And when we're providing the other person, one another, cues and ideas and responses. And actually, a big part of the challenge of, I would say, podcasting or having these kind of extended conversations, especially when you don't have a guest, is that there's not a lot of feedback and not a lot to go back and forth with. Um, so that being said, there's a real skill to, or not a real skill. It's very difficult to um, have this one-way conversation where it's just going to be me talking for 40, 50 minutes. And hopefully the things I have to say have some kind of value. Hopefully the things I have to say cause you to think a little bit, cause me to think a little bit. And ultimately, like the goal of this show or podcast is to come together, bring people together, and focus more on universally applicable ideas that might draw people together, give people things to think about that they haven't previously thought about, and enhance our perspective. Um, so far, the show has been a ton of fun. There obviously there's a lot that I think about, regarding each episode, even though I try not to put too much thought into it. I'm kind of just to articulate where I am in terms of what my goals are and what it is that and how it is that things are going so far and why I'm doing things the way that I'm doing it. Um, so, firstly, again, conversation is always better when it's two ways. So I like to have as many guests on as possible. I also like to have as many different types of conversations within those guests, and kind of get a little bit of everyone's view about about a lot of different ideas. And there are certain times that, I'll ask for someone to elaborate on an idea that they say, or I'll pick a conversation based on what I think they have something interesting to talk about. Um, or just kind of keep the space open and see where the conversation goes. That's what I generally try to do the most. I think that makes the most organic and healthiest conversation, and also the most interesting because I think that there's something about limiting yourself with who you're talking to and what you're talking about that if for example, Avrami or Charles, who's been on the show I think 3 or 4 times so far, and will be on many more times. I mean, he's a scientist, and majority of what we talked about hasn't been about science, and I don't want to pigeonhole him or anyone for that matter into just what they do because I want to hear where the conversation is going to go, what's on their mind currently, what they're going through currently, and at the end of the day, most of our most relatable experiences and the experiences that we learn the most from, yeah, they're professional, but they're generally tied into some kind of human sense of or human experience that we're having. So, on one hand, you're a scientist, on the other hand, you're a person. You're a person that, that goes through whatever challenges and accomplishments you've made in your life. And at a certain point, you're and that ties into your motivation to be a scientist. At a certain point, um, not you're not, there are things that make you who you are. And by elaborating and by allowing conversation to kind of just go wherever it's going to go, you we discover more about our roots and what makes us who we are. And I think that's really, really important. It's important for me. It's important for the people that we're talking to. And a lot of times, there's something that I really am intrigued by and I'm really invested in. Which is called emergence. And emergence is just the notion that the sum of two parts makes something greater than each of the individual components, right? Bruce Springsteen talks a lot about this when he says when it comes to music. He says, he has a Broadway show that he was doing for a long time, a couple of years. I had tickets actually to go at the time from 2017 till about 2021. So like a good 4 or 5 years, I was a massive Springsteen nut. That was pretty much the only music I listened to. And part of what I found so amazing about him was just how relatable he was to the experiences that I was going through with my life. Musically, I thought I loved the style of music, and I loved the band. I loved how tight the band was. I loved how well everyone got along, how each person got their own type of their own place and their own voice, and they all had their own inside connection and joke, not just with the band, not with Springsteen, but with the whole audience. I mean, fans of Springsteen and the E Street Band, um, they all know all the players. Clarence Clemens, the saxophone player, is as much of a legend as anyone else in that band, and Max Weinberg, the drummer, is as much of a legend. And Steven Van Zandt. I mean, like all these guys. I think that another beautiful thing that Springsteen was able to accomplish was to kind of give everyone their own space, and even though it was his own band, and he got all the writing, all the credit for doing the songwriting and coming up with the music, he gave them space to really be themselves and add more dimension and more color to the band. So anyway, he talks in his Broadway show, which he discusses his life and his musical journey and the motivation behind the things that he wrote. He talks about the notion that music is not necessarily about the best players, but it's about the right players. And then he says when you kind of get there's a moment of inspiration, there's a moment of lightning that happens that when you have the right band players and the right musicians, he says the laws of physics go out the window and 1 + 1 = 3. And what he's essentially saying is that there's something greater that comes out of there's something that emerges, something new, a new life form that totally goes beyond what the individual components are. You have one, but the new life form is a number in and of itself as well, and that would make it three, right? So then that's a third component to um, the new form of life, the thing that emerges from the two ideas or two people or whatever it is coming together is a whole new organism in and of itself, and you have to take that into account when you're considering the formula. So when I talk and I have my ideas and I talk to Zach Alexander or Guy Ben Hanan, and they have their perspective, and then we combine our perspectives, we share, we talk, we feed on each other's idea, and something new comes from that neither of us would have thought of because I'm being exposed to the new perspective and they're being exposed to my perspective. And all of a sudden you have a new input rather, that changes the trajectory of the output. You have a new input that changes what the potential could be. You might think that there's only one way to think about this, and that's the way that I thought about it. But until you take that same exact idea and you present it to someone else, and they have their own associations and their own train of thought to tack onto that idea becomes something new and something incredible, which I think, which is the beauty of and the value of talking and conversation. And there's always been this component of teamwork, and there's always been this component of even like studying partners and collaboration. And part of what the value of that is, there's the part of the value of that collaboration, part of that concept of teamwork, part of the idea of having a group work on something is that hopefully something emerges that could be that's greater than what any one individual is able to come up with. And that's why they have writing rooms in Hollywood, and that's why they have story teams where it's not just one person that's just thinking of a story necessarily when it comes to making a movie or when it comes to writing a book or it comes to coming up with a plot of a TV show, but it's a room of people. And how funny would it be if this happened? And how funny would it be, one time when I was a kid, my parents did this, and that was really funny. So let's incorporate that somehow, and then you look at the finished product, and the finished product is just something that no one individually could have accomplished. So on one hand, I do like to have conversations with people as often as possible, especially if it's going to be in a meaningful, intentional way. On the other hand, there is still the idea that, and there is still the notion that we all have a lot of thoughts, a lot of feelings, a lot of perspectives that we have kind of just bouncing around in our heads and dwelling in our heads. And if we don't take the time and the effort and the energy figure it out, to figure it out and how to put those words, ideas, perspectives into, or I guess these thoughts, ideas, and perspectives into words, then they kind of sit unfinished. It's half baked. And I'm sure you've had this experience before, because I certainly have, and I certainly do, that if you feel like you have a lot in your mind, and your head kind of feels a little weighed down because of how much you have going on that you're thinking about, but and then you find that when you either talk it out with someone or you write it out, or someone just says what's up, and then without even realizing that you're about to spill the beans, you talk about what's been weighing so heavily on you, and then you finally put into words. And sometimes words do it justice, and sometimes you feel like the words did not do those ideas justice, and the idea feels incomplete, or like you didn't do the best job that you can do with it. It's important to take the time to figure yourself out. And so part of the value of a solo episode, or part of the value of just talking things out by myself every now and then, is that there's an unadulterated perspective that's just what's going on in my head that's coming out without the influence of other people. And also allows me to kind of explore just my train of thought as I go along. And I don't think we have the opportunity to do that very often. I think that we live in a time that we don't ramble, we don't daydream, we don't really spend so much time just kind of thinking in our own heads and becoming familiar with ourselves, because we have so many distractions. Now, I've mentioned a bunch of times that I'm a Twitter addict at this point, or an X addict, and I literally, I mean, in the last week, I've gone through deleting the app and re-downloading it maybe 5, 10 times. Um, and I'm actually happy with the way that I've been doing it, because I'm not really doing it in a way that is unhealthy or manic. But if I just find that, okay, right now I'm spending too much time on it, and I know that the app's availability is giving me the space and enticing me, to just mindlessly scroll on it, I'll delete it. And even if it's for 3 or 4 hours, I get those 3 or 4 hours of pure, not distracted thoughts. Now, obviously, I'm still on my phone, I'm still texting, I'm still, picking up work calls and talking to people, but it's a totally different type of it's a totally different type of presence, and it's incredible just how much not being on social media and still having your phone could allow you the space to really kind of think about yourself and think about your life. And I actually get upset at myself. I get this very tangible feeling if I don't spend enough time. I wouldn't say in a day, but too much time, let's say a couple of days. If I let a couple of days pass without really allowing myself to think and, be aware of myself and be aware of what's going on in my head, um, it starts to weigh me down, and I start to get down. And then I'll usually have to do something like talk to a friend, go for a jog, write out my thoughts, write a little letter to myself, or a little poem, or just a little compilation of my thoughts, and move forward. Um, but so that's kind of what the benefit of doing a solo episode is every now and then, is first of all because I don't have a guest right now, but more importantly because I think it's a really good exercise to kind of keep on going. And I do actually encourage everyone, you know, if you don't do this, if you don't take the time to get to know yourself, or think about yourself, or just be kind of aware of what you're up to in your life. Um, I'll generally start and I'll sit down and I'll start writing, and I don't even know what I'm going to write about. I'm like, dear me, I'm not so happy about the way that I've used my free time in the last couple of days, a couple of weeks, because you could say, well, I have my job that I have to dedicate X amount of time to, but I still have 3 free hours in the day. And like, I don't know and the time has kind of been slipping by without me realizing it. And I don't feel like I'm using it to my fullest. And now that I have some kind of context for me to expand on, I say, well, I guess part of the reason why is because it's really comfortable watching, these Netflix shows or these HBO shows, or it's really comfortable playing this and this video game. And I know that it's designed to keep me invested in it. It's designed to keep me trapped in it. And I have to do better than that. And I have to put up a stronger fight. And then I look at that page that I just wrote this down on, and I'm like, oh my God, that's what's been bothering me. That's what's been weighing me down. And all it really took was 5, 10 minutes of my time. And then I'll usually tell my wife, or I'll tell my parents, or I'll tell my friends about, just this newfound thought and what I want to do about it. And that has led to some of the healthiest changes and healthiest perspectives that I've ever done. I mean, for a couple of months, so for about 6 months, I was doing push-ups. I was doing 3 sets of 20, 25, 30 push-ups a day. And I hate push-ups. I really hate them. And I hate everything about them, and I was never good at them. I was never able to do a push-up in my life, actually, until I was in 10th grade, where I broke my leg, because I never was strong enough. Growing up, I was, kind of nerdy, kind of out of shape, kind of not really athletic at all. And I didn't really know anything about what it meant to be healthy or not. So I wasn't morbidly obese. I wasn't, fat, but I definitely wasn't in good shape. And I remember when I was maybe 12 or 13, my uncle Daniel asked me, oh, why don't could you do 10 push-ups? I was like, I don't think I can do 10 push-ups. He's like, are you serious? I was like, yeah. He said, well, can you do five? I don't know. So I got down and I tried to do 5 push-ups. I did like two or three. And he's like, dude, you got to be able to do push-ups. Like, you just got to be able to do them. So I didn't really think too much about it, although obviously when you're young, even when you're older, and someone that you look up to and someone of authority like my uncle is going to tell you, you're looking for their approval and you don't get it, that kind of sticks with you. And it definitely sticks with you. It sticks with me enough for me to remember about it, 15, 20 years later. And I'm sure that he has no recollection of this conversation. So then maybe a year later, I was ice skating with my friend Jason. We were in the Palisades Mall, which is in New York, and there is an ice skating rink there. And we used to go Saturday nights to go ice skating, get some pizza, go ice skating, then come home and watch a movie, usually The Princess Bride or some kind of Disney movie. And so we're playing ice skating tag on the rink, and going in circles. And I'm not a very good ice skater. He's way better than I am. And I don't mind falling. I kind of have an aversion to anything that that might cause any kind of physical pain. So so we're skating around and we're playing this ice skating tag, and it dawns on me that this is not a very responsible or productive thing to do. Even as a 14-year-old, I was pretty cautious in general. And so I said, dude, I have a feeling I'm gonna hurt myself. So let's just, let's take a couple of minute break and we'll just, we'll stop with the tag. And I, and so we stop to get off and we start to roll off skate off the ice. And I fall and I break my leg immediately. And, I mean, as I'm getting off the ice, we stop playing. My leg's broken. I take off my cast. I take off the ski, the ice skating, the ice skates, and my foot by the ankle, it swelled up to the size of like a tennis ball. And Jason's dad's a podiatrist, so my dad looks at it. My dad was taking us to the mall, and he looks at it and he goes, got ice it, you're fine. And so we go home. I'm in pain. I'm in a lot of pain. But it's this kind of dull, throbbing pain. It's not like a sharp. I kind of imagine a break to be a sharp pain because you kind of imagine a snap and then you imagine just like sharpness. This was kind of a dull, throbbing pain that just was not going away. Almost like it was echoing, like this pain was just echoing in my leg over and over and over. And or my low, but kind of my ankle area. And we get home and Jason's dad comes over and takes a look at it and goes, "Yeah, you got to go to the hospital." And like, really? He goes, yeah. And I'd never been to a hospital at this point. No one in my family had broken anything. I don't think ever. I don't think my dad had broken anything. I don't think my mom had broken anything. Certainly not while I was growing up. And so this notion of being injured was actually like, it was very fresh and it was very scary because you only heard about it or you saw maybe a friend break his collarbone in middle school or something like that. But you never really like, no, it didn't really happen to me. It didn't happen to anyone in my family. So we kind of were all in denial about it. And I actually am like that till today. Like when you're confronted with something that's like a little too serious, more than what you have experience with dealing with, you kind of just deny your way around it until it goes away. um, that was kind of what I felt like actually during my entire wife's pregnancy, first pregnancy, but her entire pregnancy was me pretty much just being in denial about the fact that she's ever actually going to give birth and that I'm going to be a dad that's responsible for a living organism. Um, I was kind of just in denial about it until it happened, and then when it did, I just, I kind of just threw myself into it without really thinking too much about it or really processing what it meant, how much my life had changed. And it took a couple of months. But anyway, so I guess my dad was working the same way, and he wasn't prepared to admit that he had to take his son to the hospital. So he was like, okay, we'll go tomorrow. And so I'm up all night. I can't even get up the stairs to my bedroom. I'm sitting on the couch in pain, icing my leg. I finally get to the hospital the next day, and they tell me that I broke my leg on the growth plate, which means that because I was still growing, I was 14, even though I only grew like another inch since then. If I did not get surgery right away to fix this growth plate, then one leg would have kept on growing and the other one would have stopped. And they said that we had to do surgery right away in order to in order to make sure that that my legs were even. So I went through surgery and I ended up on crutches for I think maybe 2 or 3 months, and then had physical therapy in a boot for another 2 or 3 months. But during that period of time, I was able to do push. I'm throwing myself around on these crutches, and it was the first time in my life I was able to do push-ups. And I actually have no idea. Oh, yes, I do remember. So how I got here, full circle, is so since then, so push-ups are always hard for me, and I've done push-ups for a long time, and then I started jogging every day, and or at least at least 5, 6 days a week, maybe usually 7 days a week, and I started doing this around last October, so October 2023, and I haven't really gone more than I've been running consistently 5, 6 days a week until today. Right now it's August, I think 7th, 2024. So for the last, 8, 9 months. And while I was doing that, I felt good about jogging. And because I felt good about jogging, I felt like I didn't have to do push-ups anymore. And even though I knew that my body needed some kind of physical exertion other than just cardiac, like there's something about, actually doing, pushing against something and fighting some kind of weight force to build my muscles that I knew was important. I was kind of able to just justify it and push it in the back of my head, saying, well, I'm jogging every day, and that's really healthy, and I'm eating healthier, and I'm drinking less beer, or just consuming things that are overall better for me. So who really cares? But I think that we could only lie to ourselves for so long, or we could only be dishonest with ourselves for so long, especially if we especially if we want to take the time to get to know ourselves. So part of the reason why I think we're able to go such an extended period of time not being honest with ourselves nowadays, for people that are engaged in social media, or anyone that doesn't live under a rock, really, anyone that doesn't have a TV, anyone that doesn't have social media, anyone that's not on their phone all the time, you can kind of push these thoughts away for as long as for as long as you really want, because we could spend months or years without even really being aware as to where we are in our heads and how we're feeling and what's going on in our minds, because we have such opportunity to be distracted and to be focusing on other people and other things, that we don't have to ever worry about ourselves. But in these acts of I try to take these conscious steps towards just being aware of the things that I'm doing in my life. While I'm going through these steps, it just became more and more clear to me that, listen, you got to start doing more push-ups. You got to start, doing a little bit more weightlifting, a little bit more, something a little bit, something a little bit more than what you're doing. And you can't get away with just being, with just being satisfied with enough. And 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 I have to do something about it. But I feel the same way about the podcast. I feel the same way about anything that I do, which is my entire life is pretty much a struggle between no, between feeling like good enough and that I don't want to do anymore. And it doesn't make a difference as to what the application is. I kind of I don't really know whether this is just a me thing or whether this is a people thing, but I don't unless it's something that I'm truly passionate about, I kind of just look for it to be enough until I could do the thing I'm enthusiastic about, right? So, for example, let's say it comes to work. I sell refurbished medical equipment, which means that, you go to a doctor, you get an ultrasound, or you have someone take your blood pressure. Now, an ultrasound machine, when it's brand new, could cost anywhere between, for a regular machine, anywhere between like 40 and $150,000. It's really, really expensive, very cost prohibitive, especially if you're going to be a small mom and pop private practice. It's extremely cost prohibitive, and so there's a market for the refurbished or used equipment where, almost similar to a car, if I were to go to Kia and buy myself a new Sportage, which is what I want to do, but I haven't done yet. But I go to Kia, I buy a Sportage, pay $30,000. And I drive the car off the lot, and the second I take the car off the lot, and there's actual road mileage on it, the car goes from being worth $30,000 to being worth $20,000. I could literally bring it back down the block, and it doesn't make a difference. The same thing actually applies in the medical equipment little world, which is that if there's an ultrasound machine manufactured by GE or manufactured by Philips, The second, this machine, it could be $100,000 machine. The second that they open the machine and they demo it for a doctor, so a doctor calls GE, says, "Listen, I'm interested in this machine. Can you guys come by and show me what the machine's like?" They say, "Sure, yeah, I'm happy to." They take the machine, bring it to the doctor's office. The doctor doesn't want it anymore. Now that the company opened the machine, now that the machine, is driven off the lot, so to speak, the value just went from $100,000 to $80,000 or $60,000. And that's kind of where we come in. Now, we don't always buy just demo machines. You could buy anything machine and then you fix it up, you refurbish it, and instead of a machine being $50,000 or $80,000, you may you could have one that's 5 years old or 10 years old, and that could be $10,000 or $8,000. And so the difference in pricing is really, really crazy. The difference in affordability for a private practice is really enormous. And so most of my business comes from not from hospitals, but from private practices and places that generally have a budget that aren't just spending money indiscriminately. So, so I have to spend X amount of time, obviously, because I'm a salesperson and I'm commission based for the most part. I have a base salary and a commission. And the base salary is enough for really just very, very basic foundations, and anything else is dependent on my ability to make sales. So I think on a weekly basis, how much work have I done? How many sales have I done that allow me to do the things that I care about? And then I compare the two and I say, okay, well, so let's say Monday, Tuesday goes by, Wednesday goes by, and I have a great week of sales. I got a bunch of leads and a bunch of people reach out to me, or I followed up with a bunch of customers, and they're all ready to move forward. So, I close, I'd say five, 6 deals in the first 3, 4 days of the week. I'm not particularly driven to do more work the rest of the week, or do a ton of work the rest of the week. I definitely don't have the same kind of push because now I feel like I've done that trade. I've done that trade. I've traded my time, my effort, and gotten compensated for enough to do what's important. What's important to play guitar. What's important to write. What's important is to podcast. What's important is to spend time with my wife and my kid and my friends, and to learn, and to study Torah, to learn, which is an enormous priority for me. And so my job is essentially a means to an end, and I have a very difficult time forcing myself to go above and beyond with it, because for me, good enough is good enough. But I don't think that attitude of good enough is a very healthy attitude, or one that's going to be very sustainable long term. Because at a certain point, I'm going to have to build up either I'm going to have to build up something on the side, like this podcast, or like another job or like another business, where I'm more enthusiastic about it, where I'm not just settling for good enough. Because I've found that the things that I'm passionate about, I could spend a very, very long time doing. So I could spend, for example, I love to teach, and I've brought it up plenty, and I've talked about it plenty, and I will probably continue to talk about it plenty. Um, I feel like if someone told me that I can make the same amount of money that I'm making now doing sales, but I'd have to work twice the amount of hours in a day, and I could be a teacher, I would absolutely do that. And not only would I do that, I would think I would love every minute of it, because it doesn't feel like it's work. It doesn't feel like I'm pushing myself to do something that I don't really want to do, and it doesn't feel like I'm not. It doesn't feel like I'm swimming upstream. And when I do something that kind of speaks to me, then I'm swimming downstream. And I think that there's only a certain amount of. I think everyone has a different level of uh, potential, or but mental budget, when it comes to being able to do things that they don't really care about, but they kind of just look at it as some kind of means to an end. And everyone has a different amount of energy and time that they can expend on the thing they don't care about, because the end will justify the means. I have a much harder time with that. And I think that my budget for doing these activities that are just means to an end, it's kind of been running a little low recently, and I've been working in this job. It's a family business. I work with my dad, but I've been working this job since 2016 or so. I started getting a little involved when I was in college, doing eBay listings and just trying to, just learning about these machines and seeing what the values are and helping my dad just get, because a big part of the business is inventory. And then the other big part of the business, which is the harder part, is getting everyone to see what kind of inventory you have and getting the word out there and getting people to buy your equipment. And so a lot of times we'll buy a lot of stuff and no one will even know that we have it for a year or two or three, which is obviously a terrible business model, but that's kind of been my job, is to do that. Um, so I think that part of what is pushing me to take this podcast so seriously and to really put my effort into making this into doing this well and consistently is the fact that I feel like I'm burning out and I have to build something else up for because by the time that I do burn out, I gotta have something else that I could almost fall back on, that I could throw myself into completely, that I could feel like I have some kind of foundation for. And the most challenging part of or the most terrifying part of life for me is when I look at life like a series of several hundred steps that I have to just accomplish all of them, I get overwhelmed very quickly. But if I look at life like a series, like one step at a time, and I just isolate, okay, today I have to do this, and then I have to do this tomorrow. Just those two steps, I get much better. I'm much more productive, and I could do those small goals, those smaller isolated goals, one step at a time a lot more easily. So right now, and it is similar actually to the way that I learn guitar, and anyone kind of learns anything new, which, you know, you can. I mean, there's two ways about it. You could study, all of music theory, and then you can understand. Then you can look at an instrument, and then you can understand how everything fits in relation to that whole theory that you learned. Or you can learn one thing at a time, and then as you pick up each individual component, you start to realize how it fits into a larger puzzle and how it fits into a larger piece. So when I started learning guitar, the first thing I learned was chords, right? So I'd make a C chord and I would strum down and be like C. And then I'd make a D chord and strum down and go D. And then and that was it. And then the next step would be, okay, now that I know how to make a C and a D, I'm going to switch back and forth between them, and move my hands as quickly as possible, which is when you're already practicing an unnatural motion, like making a chord. It's hard to do. It's hard to change your hand because you're putting so much mental effort into actually making the correct shape with your fingers and pressing down on the strings the way that you should. You're putting so much effort into that changing that while you're moving another body part, while you're moving my hand, is extremely, extremely difficult. It's almost overwhelming, So I would just break down the guitar into different parts. So I'd start a chord, and then I'd do changing chords, and then I'd do changing chords while I strum, and then I change chord, and then I try to keep up different strum patterns. So now I have to practice. You strum downwards, down, down, up, so now I have to remember and I have to memorize that notion. That notion has to become natural to my body, has to become muscle memory. Down, down, up, down, up. And like 95% of songs that I play are played with that strum pattern. And then you integrate singing into it. And each step along the way, the notion of playing a song was so far away, so overwhelming to me that I couldn't even think about playing any kind of song. I was just thinking about, okay, I'm just making the C chord. I'm just making the Z chord. I'm just going back and forth between C and D, C and D, C and D, C and D. And then now back and forth C and D, I'm going to strum. I'm going to make sure to keep the pattern. Oh shoot, I messed up that C, I messed up that D, and then eventually everything kind of fit into place. I was able to understand how each component fit into the puzzle. I got comfortable doing each step. And then I started singing and being able to play while and really being able to play the guitar. The same thing I think is going to apply to this podcast. I think it's really important. First of all, I think it's really important to keep on putting out content consistently because discipline is extremely important when it comes to doing anything well and being successful at anything. To be disciplined means to do it with regularity, whether you feel like it or not, whether it's easy or not, whether you have anything to talk about or not. Discipline is, just the backbone of what it takes to do anything well. So so right now I'm not really focusing so much, and even though I will in the future, and I know it's ahead. I have to focus on. I'd like to focus on the quality of the sound. I'd like to focus on trying to do in-person interviews instead of over the phone and leaving things subject to, what internet connections like or what background noise is like for me or for someone else. I'd like to get a quiet place. Hopefully, I'm going to have a house shortly within the next month or two, and within that house, I'll definitely have a designated area where I'm going to be quiet, sitting and recording, and hopefully, I'll have more in-person one-on-one conversations. I've had maybe I think two or three out of I've had two or three in-person conversations out of the last, I think, 10 or 12 episodes. So I'd like to get those numbers up. I'll probably still do a couple of, I will keep on doing solo episodes at different points, but at the end of the day, I want to get to doing that well. So that's step two. I'd like to also try to get video in eventually. I think that's important. I think it's fun to kind of see the interaction and interplay between people. And sitting in the same room, be able to pull up different sources, be able to pull up different ideas, and kind of provide, a little bit of both, and eventually really get to build something up that's both. So right now, just in terms of breaking it down, I'm at to use the guitar metaphor, I'm at I would say, strumming and changing chords phase, which is I'm on a roll. My goal of putting out minimum three, hopefully five episodes a week is being, I've been on par for the last month, and I think that, I mean, I'm pretty good at keeping up things. I think that most routines and for most people, the hardest part is the first couple of days or the first couple of weeks, and then after that, it kind of becomes part of what your routine is and what your habits are. I have a lot of routines and a lot of habits that I spend every single day doing that I don't even think about anymore. I spend time learning Torah every day. I jog 6 days a week. I try to write, I probably write 3 or 4 days a week. And so at this point, a lot of the things that I do, I don't even think about. They just have become a kind of a default. And I'm hoping that this becomes the same thing. So we will call it there. I think there's just an update as to what's happening. A little bit of rambling thought, but um, I will see you tomorrow, hopefully, with another in-person episode. Bye, everyone.